right. Well, how are you doing? It's been a while, hey?
Yeah, it has. It has. I don't know how much you know about what's happening in the UK in terms of the politics and home education.
I've just seen that there's this homeschooling impact thingy, but I haven't had a chance to look it up in a lot of detail.
Right.
It's on my to-do list. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got the Children's Wellbeing in Schools bill,
Yeah.
which had it had its first reading just before Christmas.
Right.
So nobody was really paying attention. And then the second reading was just after Christmas, so nobody was really paying attention. And so it's ended up at committee level, and that's just come to a finish.
Okay. So is it passed now, or has it still got to go further?
It's not passed. It's going to have a third reading, and then it'll go to the House of Lords and things. But yeah, the committee stage has passed, and yeah, I mean, basically. It's increasing state control, but it's doing it by stealth in that it's kind of making out that it'll just be about home education, but it's, because then less people will complain about it. But essentially, in terms of home education, the impact is that as it's proposing, you would have to keep a log of every activity you do as a parent with your child, listing every website that you use, every book that you read. It asks you to specify how many hours each parent spends educating the child. And so it's wanting to put a register in place for home education, for home educators, because we had a really sad case of a girl, Sarah Sharif, who was murdered by her parents, and at the time she was murdered, she was actually registered as home educated, but she'd only been taken out of school by the parents like a few months before. She'd been in a school, there'd been social services involved, and they both the social services closed the case, and the school didn't inform the local authority that the parents took her out, but also, the father was known to be violent, but the judge still gave custody to him. So there's a whole stream of system failures, but basically it's been used as a justification of we've got to clamp down on home educators because there's children who are we're being told are being home educated, but actually it's a facade for abuse.
And they always go for that angle.
I know.
And they always use a nice high-profile case that makes everybody emotionally triggered, but, doesn't really look at the statistics of comparing that to the same type of cases without homeschooling. Yeah, it's just an old propaganda technique, really.
Yeah. And so what they're saying is that there needs to be a register. Well, there already is a register, and 100% of local authorities provide information about the families that are registered as home educating. And there's a whole conflation of issues around safeguarding home education and children missing in education. And it's but they're arguing for annual home visits for home educators, for all home educators. Under safeguarding premises, but then saying that there would be an evaluation of whether the education was suitable, in quotation marks, like suitable education. And yeah, so I mean, I think that's triggered a lot of people I know, because a lot of them are like, well, why would I don't want anybody in my home, like they've got no right to come into my home. And and they don't. I mean, I think it's this thing of by saying that the local authority should have the right to come into your home once a year under the guise of because you're a home educator is basically saying we suspect all home educators of being abusive. Like, you know, because nobody else, like, you know, there's parents who don't send their kids to nursery and they're not being specified in this bill as having home visits. It's only home educators. But I think the really scary thing is that you can have these local authority officials come into your home and judge you and evaluate you when they've got no grounds to really enter your home by, like there's no just cause for concern or anything. But they can come in and they'll be coming in from a mainstream view of what is a suitable education is. And if they deem what you're doing as unsuitable, then they can issue a school attendance order. And the school attendance order, the local authority gets to choose the school that the child will attend. The parents don't get a say. And then the child has to attend that school. And if they don't, the parent can be imprisoned for 6 months to 51 weeks without trial. They are automatically guilty of an offence if their child does not attend. And and £2,500 fine. And there's a whole heap of stuff about school attendance as well. Because since COVID, school attendance has been an issue, but instead of thinking about why it's an issue and trying to resolve that, they are basically they've in the bill it's basically upping the ante of the penalties that parents can receive if their child does not attend school regularly, and just fines and penalties and stuff like that, rather than thinking about, well, why is it that kids are struggling to attend?
Exactly.
And then there's also there's in there they've kind of got stuff that's ruling that academies, which are a separate branch of our education system, of like they will have to now follow the national curriculum, which they hadn't had to do before. But that and I think what concerns me about that is that at the moment they're also in the process of rewriting the national curriculum, and we have no idea what's going to be in it. So they're kind of increasing the reach of the national curriculum, because it is quite likely that they'll then start saying that home educators need to start following a curriculum or whatever. So yeah, it's messy, and it's a lot. There's a lot of fear, and there's a online protest on the 28th of February, and then there's a kind of in-person protest on the 8th of March, I think it is. But it's tricky, because I think because of the Sarah Sharif case, a lot of people are going, well, yeah, home educators should be visited, and it's like, but it's kind of assuming that if you're home educating, your child is invisible to the community. And it's like, well, no, we still go to the supermarkets, and we still have neighbours, and we still go to groups, and we still, you know, our child just doesn't just disappear. But yes, there's a lot of bias, and I think it for me, like, it had a massive impact because it spoke to that whole kind of you're not doing enough in terms of what I'm doing with like and it kind of made me start feeling like we needed to do more, and so I started kind of upping the ante, and of course that just meant he retreated, and and it was like I was watching a car crash in slow motion. Like, I could feel what was happening, and I knew that it wasn't right, but I just couldn't stop it.
Yeah. That's the problem when you're under pressure.
Yeah. So, I mean, we did as a local group, we did actually meet with our MP. So a number of us wrote to our MP, and then we met with her. And it was interesting though, because you feel like, why am I having to explain this? Because I was saying, look, with the best will in the world, one annual visit a year is not going to safeguard children who are truly at risk.
Not at all.
It's not going to do anything. It's going to do absolute jack shit apart from
honestly, even listing all your books and how many hours a day is not going to do anything either. I mean, you can suck that out your thumb.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's ridiculous. And the MP was like, oh, well, I think done. And I said, we'd asked our children what their response would be to a stranger turning up at the house and asking questions about what they did during their day and stuff. And I said they were shut the door on the person's face, run away, hide under the table, not talk to them. And I said, all of those are actually incredibly appropriate safety behaviours that our children would be exhibiting. But to a local authority official who doesn't know our child, that could look like behaviours that are the result of abuse. Do you know what I mean? like that they're terrified or whatever. And I was like, but that's being caused by the home visit, not by their home situation or their educational situation.
Because the home visit is actually abusive.
Exactly. And that was my point to the MP. And she said, oh, but done sensitively, it's not like a social worker in a grey suit coming to the door and asking austere questions and stuff. And she's like, it can be done sensitively. And I was like, but it won't be because we're already a community that's got stigma against us. There's already a view that school is the best thing for children, and therefore we're going against that. So automatically there's a bias against us. And I was like, and these people are coming to our homes with the power to force our children back into school that they don't want to attend and potentially imprison us. I was like, that's not going to make for a relaxed home visit. Jesus Christ. And she said, well, what would you have instead then? And I said, well, just the same rights as any other parent, that people don't get to come and invade our homes unless there's due cause for concern. Why am I having to spell this out? It's very scary. It feels very scary, and I have to kind of keep revisiting it and going, well, it's not in place yet, and we are fighting it and we're doing what we can. But also, I mean, just as a group of local home educators, we're saving the local authority hundreds of thousands of pounds in specialist school placements, because all of our kids would need more than what a mainstream school could offer. And so it just, I think, that angers me as well, because I'm like, hang on, so you've pushed us out in a number of cases, and left us with no other option but to home educate, and now you're going to vilify us for taking up the option and embracing it because you don't want that. Like, how dare you? I start getting very angry as well. But yeah, so that's what's happening in the UK.
Sorry?
So that's what's happening in the UK.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, but I think this is also where the PDA parents have got a particularly strong case as well.
Yeah.
Both in terms of exactly what you've just said there, where the provision is inadequate, so that you don't have any other options.
Yeah.
And then you're punished for using the only option you've got. And then secondly, in terms of home visits, school became unsafe. And now home is going to become unsafe. And, how are you going to help your PDA recover from that? Because it's not going to be the next day that it's just, left behind.
No.
So this is interesting to me because it definitely ties into what we're trying to work on in South Africa.
Yeah.
And I want to try and find ways to interface with people to try and make this an option because, as she said, what would you have instead then?
Yeah.
And that's really the point. That's where we come to this whole horizontal communication perspective. We have to break out of the cycle of governments trying to force something onto people and people having to resist and protest against the thing. And we need to actually offer them an alternative that is okay for everybody and meets everybody's ethically okay needs as opposed to kind of just rampant control needs or kind of manipulative political needs or whatever, exploitative needs. No. But something that meets everybody's fair enough needs. And I do think that the whole human rights framework, the right-centric education framework, is the right way to go with that. So one of the things we're doing right now in South Africa, for example, we're just experimenting right now as I speak. The kids are busy setting up a new Riverstone Village Minecraft server.
Oh, right, yeah.
Right, and with the idea that anybody in the South African Right-Centric Education Network would be able to join it. And then, that in itself becomes one more piece in a true safeguarding puzzle, because you can then say to your government, hey, look, all these right-centric education kids have access to this Minecraft server, and they can literally make a message in a bottle that their parents will never know about within this. And it will reach the mods, and the mods can call social services. That's even better safeguarding than you've got with your silly little method. So, setting up things like this, that one then has a very strong argument, because I think that, as you said, it's community that creates safety for children. And driving people under the radar to hide what they're doing and try and not get caught does not make it possible for them to have community. So they're actually creating a situation where abusers will find it easier to hide, because everybody's hiding. Even the good people are hiding. So how do you tell who's hiding for bad reasons?
Yeah, I think one of the arguments that's been put in the media is like, oh, well, the good home educators don't need to worry. And it's like, no, we absolutely do. Because, would you just randomly give up your rights to privacy in your own home? Like, to the local authority? No, why would you? Why should we do that? It's just crazy. And I think that it is that idea that because that our kids aren't going to school, that they're not visible within the community, when actually I would say they're more visible precisely because they're not going to school. People notice them more. They see them. They pay attention when they're in the supermarket, because it's odd to have a child in the supermarket during school hours of school age, so they get watched more. It's I really
sorry to interrupt you, but although there we do have a problem when it comes to PDA, because people who don't understand PDA and encounter a disproportionate number of PDAs in the supermarket who are not in school can start making inferences about socialization and behavior and all of that kind of thing. And that's also where, one needs to have, I think, structured community, structured, also, as you said, evaluation, that evaluation is done in a completely different way. And this is also, again, the right-centric education idea that the evaluation is self-evaluation and it's self-reporting, but it's not the kind that they're talking about there. It's not saying, well, we read these 52 books and did this 65,000 maths problems in these 2 hours. It's not that which is just going to make it impossible for our kids to do anything that the government wants reported on, because the PDA is just not going to be able to go to any of those places, and it's going to create maths and reading allergies through the roof. It's going to make it impossible for them to do anything so-called educational. it needs to be rights-based. It needs to be the parent saying, this is how we meet the optimizing conditions, this is how we meet the rights, and the child having access to be able to call BS on that through some kind of channel. That's really what we need to set up. And I think it's sounding to me like you probably need it even more urgently than South Africa needs it, because Britain's government is more resourced in terms of enforcing and actioning these abuses.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the thoughts I had was that really the home education shouldn't really be being evaluated by local authorities, because local authorities don't really know anything about it.
Exactly.
And so we've got a number of organisations that are, home education organisations. They've been set up by people who have home educated for home educators to provide support. And I was like, well, actually, it's a difficult one, but like if there's trust with that organisation, then potentially helping to fund that organisation so that more people could access that meaningfully could be helpful. And like you say, create that community and that structure that where families could raise concerns, like and receive the support that they need or want. But to force it just instantly changes the dynamic around it completely. I mean, I was thinking like when we registered as home educated, we were in Somerset, but we very quickly got moved over to the Welsh system because we ended up living at my mother-in-law's in Wales, and they had a really lovely system in that they would ring you just to kind of introduce themselves, say, these are the resources we've got, I'm your point of contact. If you've got any questions or concerns, feel free to email or call us, and we'll check in once a year. And it was a video call or a phone call once a year, and you could talk about what you were doing and if you had any concerns and stuff. And it was really, it felt really genuine, and they had chosen people who had home educated. But in Somerset, when we've then come back, they don't even have a home education department, so nobody in the local authority really understands it. And that Somerset, along with a whole load of other local authorities, are about to go bankrupt, so they don't actually have the resourcing to set up anything. So I'm like, well, you're not going to get people who know their stuff visiting your home. You're going to get some like person who just doesn't have a clue, and is coming in with their own biases of what is the right way to do things, making a judgment call and stuff. So I just feel like actually we've got a service called Parent Partnership, which is funded by local authorities but is actually independent of local authority, to support parents who are going through our EHCP process, which is where they're applying for additional funding for a child's additional needs. And so that service is meant to provide support to parents about how to navigate the process, and they can advocate for the parent and things like that. And I'm like, well, really, if we had like a national version of that for home educators that was, centrally funded but independent, that then home educators could feel safe approaching. But if you're tied to the authority that can imprison you, like how much are you going to reveal to that organisation? And there's also, like, within the bill, what they've started saying, or what they've outlined, is that any extracurricular activities or organisations have to report additional information on home educated children to the authorities. And so again, there's another layer of discrimination, and already we've seen certain organisations shut their doors to home-educated children because they're saying this bill highlights that the government is wanting to stop home educating, and so we're not going. Any child wanting to attend this course must be affiliated with a school. A school must be registered with them to attend. And so, like you say, it's kind of pushing people underground because they're not going to be able to attend these groups because these groups are kind of going to be resistant because it's a whole load more paperwork for them for a home ed child to attend. And there's also again, I don't know how it is what they're called in South Africa, but we've got child in need with social services, which is like a tier of risk, and then you've got child protection, which is an elevated risk, which is under section 47. And basically what they're saying is that any child under section 47 shouldn't be home educated. And I can on the surface, I can understand why they're saying that, but actually people can be at section 47 for a whole heap of reasons. So if you're involved with social services at child in need or child protection level, you won't automatically be allowed to home educate your child. And if you have a section 47, you can be made to have your child attend school. And there's also, if a child is enrolled in a special school, you will not automatically be allowed to home educate your child. You'd have to ask for permission. So then you've got discrimination against people with additional needs, because it's like their right to home education has been taken away. It's like,
and ironically, that's often the kids who most need it, who most actually need to have that one-on-one quiet environment. It's very interesting because, I mean, it's just an extension of everything the system is doing wrong that's driving kids out of school, and they're doing more of it. Because if you think about it, what we want is where there are classrooms, we want those classrooms to be friendly places where the kids don't have to feel judged for not knowing, but they can ask for help and ask questions and get support, and that's an educational environment. Whereas now more and more we're going towards imposing things on them and testing them in ways that makes them sort of feel judged and ashamed and creates a problem, and now we're going to extend that into this. Instead of having communities of support and best practice where parents can actually say, oh, I am struggling with something. Can you help? What do you do in these cases? The parent is going to be incentivized to hide the fact and pretend they're not struggling, pretend everything is fine, so that, that, and it's just absolutely, they're being really, really blind to the fact that they've created the problem in the first place, and now they're going to make it worse. And as you're saying, so often it's going to be people, for example, especially like neurodivergent families, going to not fit into the system as a result of the trauma that the system's putting them through, maybe end up in section 47, and then, oh gosh, no, it's just really a mess. So from my perspective, I cannot focus on the whole of the group of home educators. It's a very, very varied group. I don't know what yours like there, but we've got quite a contingent in South Africa that are kind of fundamentalist, conservative, separatist people who are not actually there for the rights of the child, are actually there from a perspective of the child as chattel. So that's where I again feel that the Rights-Centric Education Network is really what we have to focus on here as a proposal, and we need to leave everybody else to their own devices and set up networks for people who actually do have, who actually feel, the full range of children's rights is great. And we do want to fulfill all of that and treat kids with respect and as partners and not just sort of have this authoritarian parental thing. But again, ironically, that's something that's not so easy for the mainstream schools to understand because they are still treating child as chattel. They're just having an arm wrestle with the parents as to whether the child is property of the state or property of the parent.
Right.
And I think that our particular community is very different because we're saying the child is property of the child and of the planet.
Yeah. I think that was
And
one of the interesting things, actually, because oh gosh, what's the guy's name? The guy from Germany who's in a court case at the moment. That's part of the group.
Daniel. Yeah.
Daniel.
Daniel.
So he actually attended an online meeting about the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill. I saw him in the chat group, and he was saying, this isn't about safeguarding children. This is about increasing state control. And I do feel like it's because in the UK our home educating numbers are growing significantly. So we've got tens of thousands of kids being registered as home educated now per year, and that's really scary for a government that doesn't understand what the hell's going on. And so I feel like they're just kind of broadening the net. It's like, okay, so when we can't keep you in the school, so now we're going to widen the net so that we can control you in your homes as well, because you're not doing what we're expecting and what we want. And it's it is that view of like increasing the control, and it's pretty worrying where it's heading. So I mean, we in the UK, I personally haven't really come across a lot of home educators who are doing so for religious reasons or things like that. I think there are home educators that do it in a number of different ways. So some do follow the national curriculum, but they might do it in a more bespoke way, in a hands-on way than would be delivered in the classrooms and things. And I think it tends to be generally a lot more relaxed. But certainly the group that I am connected with locally, it's very much more following a child-led, self-directed approach, and we're all doing it in different ways depending on what we can tolerate and what our kids can tolerate, and what our kids' interests are, and different levels of resources that we've got available and things. And but I haven't come across the kind of more extreme political or belief driven reasons for home educating myself, but maybe that's just the groups that I keep. I don't know.
Yeah, look, it might be the groups that you keep, because I didn't realize how prevalent it was in South Africa until I started to, in the last couple of years, really having to have all sorts of allies against the legislation. And then you get to really see who's standing next to you in that space. And it'd be interesting to see who you find in the in-person and online protests. But I also do suspect that it's more prevalent in South Africa than in the UK. And right in the USA, but let's not go there.
I was going to say that might.
Sure. So, this really is a turning point, I think, because, I mean, as much as I agree with you that maybe, they're panicking because there's so many kids leaving school, looking from this little distance over here, I see also all these narratives about the no excuses schools thing and the isolation booths for kids and isolation rooms. And it feels like
policies.
the whole system is becoming extremely kind of paranoid, obsessive, compulsive, to the point of I'm sort of looking at this as sort of a weird kind of sublimated BDSM thing that's going on here in the UK system, that that there seems to be this need to turn children into little I don't know, little slaves, with their parents as the slave kind of drivers. And I don't know what's going on in your national psyche, honestly. I really don't know.
I think there's a lot of anxiety about, that our systems are crumbling, around us, like the political system, the NHS, the education system. Like, even people who are pro-school recognise that the education system is pretty broken. Like, it's not got enough funding. Everyone is burning out and stuff. So I think there's a lot of anxiety generally, so that's quite easy for politicians to tap into. But I've been doing quite a few remote EHCP assessments in my work for a local authority, and the secondary school policies around behaviour and that. One of the kids that I was assessing had 144 pages of behaviour logs.
Oh, good heavens.
And I was like, at what point surely at some point someone should have looked at that and gone, this isn't working. We need to review and regroup and rethink what we're doing, because it's not working for this kid. But no, because it's like, no, the kid must fit the system. If the kid doesn't fit the system, then it's the kid that's the problem. And the language, like you say, is horrendous. Like there was one school that it had a behaviour patrol. So they literally had people patrolling the corridors that could be walkie-talkied to come and collect students from classrooms who were causing trouble for the teacher.
So
does the UK, to isolation.
Does the UK maybe want to rewind history and lose to Germany? Because come on, this is Hitler's colony here. Is it not?
Really becoming authoritarian. I was talking to a mum, a home-editing mum, who actually one of her children was asked to go back into school, and so they'd started attending, but he's got ASD, and it was in the first term of his attendance, and he was 2 minutes late for a lesson, and so he got a 20-minute detention.
Gosh.
The mum contacted the school's detention officer, so they actually give out enough detentions that there is a dedicated role to the job.
Sure.
Oh my God. And the mum said, look, I realise he was 2 minutes late, but he has got ASD. He can get disorientated, especially in crowds. It's his first term. I really think to support his continued attendance, it would be really helpful if we could let this one slide, so that he's got the message that he was late, and we can work on some strategies to make sure that he's on time in the future. But I think, him having to attend this detention with kids who actually scare him could be really detrimental. And the detention officer's response was, well, when he gets out into the real world, he's not going to be able to use his ASD as an excuse for breaking the law. He'll just end up in prison.
Oh, for heavens and above.
2 minutes late.
That's insane.
2 minutes late for a lesson, and they're comparing that.
And you'll end up in prison.
Breaking the law and ending up in prison. And you're like, oh my God, the world's gone mad. And so there is this, I feel like there is a massive escalation in people applying for EHCPs because their children's needs are not being met. And I really feel like it is this culture of control that is creating that, because it's like we're just trying to control, and all of these kids are reacting to that, and they can't cope, and they haven't really got. They've got an option of rebelling, they've got an option of complying, or they've got an option of collapsing, essentially.
Oh, yeah, no. Oh, so it sounds like, there's sort of a combination of, on the one hand, some political opportunism, because there always is that, and there's always people who want to exploit the situation for their own gain, and then probably the majority you've got is just a whole lot of human beings not knowing what the heck to do because everything's changing too fast and becoming too unpredictable, and then, the natural response is to try and get a grip on it and simplify it and make it behave. So really, I do think we need to come in quickly and come in strongly and come in with a counter proposal that's reasonable and, protest around not getting that, if necessary. Because the problem that there is, if it's just about the system doing what it knows how to do, doing the only thing it knows how to do, and doing that more, and then people protesting about that, is that then the conversation remains about that. It remains a reaction against what the system automatically does. And then we've just got a tussle and a power struggle. And we don't necessarily have progress, and we don't really have grounds for them to come to the party and sit down and move into horizontal mode, because, why would they, or how could they? Whereas I think if we put something else on the table that's reasonable, and we can point out how reasonable it is and say, well, what about this? Why do you object to this? What are your objections, so that we can figure out how to accommodate them to better meet your needs? So, come up with, detailed objections to our proposals, rather than, just trying to push your solution. I don't think that's something that they encounter very often. I know I'm a dreamer. I'm not the only one. But I don't see another way through this, really, because I think that they're as desperate as everyone else. And as you say, the systems are collapsing. We are in a time of very great change on this planet right now. It's just, there's no two ways about it. Whatever your narrative, however you want to ascribe that, whatever you do want or don't want to believe about that and its causes, nobody's really, I don't think anybody's really confident that the old ways are sustainable, or working, or will keep working next year. Some people are assuming the answer is to double down and do more, and some people are assuming that the answer is to change. It's
So it's
so we're the ones who've got a clue of how to change it. They don't know. We can't expect them to come up with it. How would they? They don't have our experience.
It feels quite frustrating, because they've got, there are these bigger home edding organizations that, and they've been great. They've been doing online talks to explain the bill to home educators and explaining it in detail, and these are the steps that you can take to kind of get your voice heard and things like that. But even they don't seem to be being listened to, and it's like, well, they've got a wealth of expertise and experience within those organizations, and they're far bigger than we are, like, as in me and my little local group. And it's like, well, how do you get ahead? Because it is that cognitive bias in the people that you're trying to talk to, that you feel like you're almost automatically dismissed. And I think one of the things that frustrates me is I know it because I used to be one. Like, I used to work in local authority, and I remember, sort of not really understanding home education, just kind of going, well, oh, that's weird, like, why would someone choose to do that? And I didn't really go beyond that. And then there was one case I worked with where the girl had quite severe disabilities, and the mum had been home educating and then decided that she would like for her daughter to attend school, and so I was supporting that process. And yeah, that didn't really kind of open my eyes to it. It's only in the process of having to embrace it myself and kind of living through the intricacies of what that means on a day-to-day basis that you're like, well, this is really hard. And I mean, one of my points has been like around the safeguarding aspects of it, is that actually the majority of parents who are abusive towards their children aren't abusive in a planned and premeditated way. They are often abusive because they are in a complete state of overwhelm and stress themselves, and or they have their own issues, like they haven't had an appropriate model of being parented themselves. They're suffering from intergenerational trauma or whatever. There are so many reasons, but it's rare that that parents would like go for a really planned attack of abuse on their child. And so actually the majority of parents in that position would not choose to home educate because their children are a source of overwhelm and stress a lot of the time. So actually when their kids go to school, it's a relief. Because they get a break. So I feel like actually, there's this assumption that, abusive parents, that's what they're going to do. They're going to register their child as home educated because then they can get away with it. And I'm like, but actually that's not the case. I think, the parents that register home education are doing it because they want the best for their kid, and it's a massive sacrifice. So that's not, that's not the path that many abusive parents would take. So
100%.
Yeah.
So again, we come back to these stereotypes and kind of these scare memes that are so pervasive now. This idea of the predator. And I mean, of course there are predators. Of course there are. But as you said, I mean, it's like an annual home visit, or
it's not going to stop
that's
those.
That's exactly the people. It's not. If you look at your really hardcore predator, they're very good at hiding, and they don't need something as simple as a home education registration. I mean, if I look at the predation that's being uncovered in schools and church groups and these places where children are deeply immersed and very visible, and the predators manage to hide everything for years, and how many victims, really?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's one of the things. I do have to say that we come back to the only real safety that there is to empower the child. Because what enables predators to hide things is disempowered children. And so now we have a system that is actively working on disempowering children as much as humanly possible, and making sure that their initiative and their confidence is completely squashed, and their obedience to authority is absolute. And that is actually grooming for being a victim for predation. That is not safeguarding.
No. And I think that's one of the things that I sort of said to the MP. I was like, one of the reasons we ended up in home education was because the school system was actually abusive towards my child. Like, the system as it stands, like, was leading him into a mental health crisis. forcing him to attend was contributing to that, as it does for like several thousands of children across the UK who are being made to attend because they have to reach a certain level of attendance because of this new government initiative around attendance. And that if they don't attend, their parent will be fined and everything. And that is actually abusive because it's demanding something of them that they cannot cope with without descending into a crisis. I just and so yeah, I just feel like actually it's the schools the kids need to be safeguarded from, in a number of instances. Obviously, not all of them, but like for a number of our kids, especially PDA kids, the system is just not right.
Yeah. But
so
nobody wants to be seen as a perpetrator, right? So I would be very interested if you were to think, I know, you've said it was only having to engage with this yourself as a parent that shifted your view. But, given that you've got that prior experience, to think deep around what might have opened your eyes possibly. And I don't know, do you still have contact with people who are in that role that you know personally that you could have these conversations with?
Yeah.
And just try and mine it a little bit. It's like, that whole horizontal communication concept of the multi-partiality and the empathy and what are the actual needs in there. This is also where, people like, Derry Hannum and Peter Hartkamp and Jakob Hecht have had success in terms of, being able to talk to the system and listen to the actual human needs in there and try to find ways that can become win-win. Because I think you're in a very peculiarly positive position for that with your past experience, your current experience. Bridge.
Yes, it's tempering the anger enough to speak coherently and calmly and horizontally.
That's so hard. When it's your child under attack, it's so hard to remain calm.
Yeah. And and I think it's the injustice as well that really gets me. And it has made me realize like how privileged I have been, kind of in terms of I don't know, the representation and stuff within politics, because this is the first time I've felt like I'm a minority that is not being understood or recognised or respected, which is obviously a very privileged position that I'm only experiencing that now. But it does, it makes me feel angry on a whole nother level for all the other groups that this has been happening to for centuries. Do you know what I mean? Like it goes much bigger. It kind of like ripple effect out.
Oh, that's a paradoxical, uncomfortable silver lining, I guess, eh?
Yeah, it's all part of the learning. But and I think in the face of all that, I feel like as a family, we've still managed, like we've had some wins out of navigating the difficulty in that, because like I said, when I was having to like meet with the MP and plan for that with the group, and like was getting my knickers in a twist, for want of a better expression, around it all, and feeling that need to push, and then actually kind of becoming really conscious of that and going, right, well, this isn't working, so I've just got to suspend that and go back to what I know my child needs, and actually it worked really well. So like he was open to me watching him play some video games. So I just kind of sat alongside him, and then I found this Netflix series on the history of the development of video games.
Wow.
And I didn't even say, "Do you want to watch this?" Because I knew it would be a no. I just was like, "Oh, this looks interesting," and just started watching it on my phone alongside him. And he just started being interested and listening in, and then he asked if we could watch some more over lunch together, and he just started asking if we could watch an episode together, and then from that, because it talks about all the really early games like Space Invaders, and he's like, "Oh, I'd really love to try playing Space Invaders." And then I found a series of YouTube videos that taught you how to make Space Invaders in Scratch.
Great.
And again, I didn't ask him if he wanted to do it. I just started doing it at the kitchen table, and then he came down for a snack and saw me doing it. He's like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Wow, I'm trying to make you Space Invaders because you said you wanted to have a go playing it." And he just then was like really intrigued and basically took over doing it, which was great. And and he's kind of got so interested in it that he's now thinking he might be up to go to London to visit the Science Museum, which has got an
great
exhibition about the history of video games. So that's been an amazing turnaround, like from
beautiful. No wonder you've got capacity to worry about the big picture suddenly, hey? You're cruising. You're absolutely cruising with the SDE facilitation now. That's lovely.
I wouldn't say cruising, but like, it was there was a definite there was a turning point where my husband came to bed and I was like, "Oh my God, what are we doing?" And then I kind of woke up the next morning and I was like, "Okay, regroup."
Stay grounded.
Yeah, right. And I think that experience of, the natural expansion and contraction of what he will and won't do, and getting used to that rather than kind of following this expectation that learning should be on this linear, gradual pathway and observable all the time that we're kind of indoctrinated with, but kind of just being able to swipe that to one side and just go, actually, no, I can see this natural pattern, and it's amazing and it's powerful and it's beautiful, and it's at a very different pace, but it's at the right pace for my child. This kind of gives you faith in what you're doing. So you feel like, I can fight this. I can fight my corner around that this is the right thing to be doing, even if it doesn't look like it to them.
And that's the problem, is that it doesn't look like that to them because they don't know what they're looking at, and they're basically, you know what it reminds me of? I don't know if they've still got these things, but we used to have multiple choice tests. Was card, and then you had the card had little holes in it, and then they would, to mark the test, they would put the card with the holes over your paper.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
So you don't get to see anything except what shows through the little holes that you cut, because those are the right things, and those are right, and you don't see anything else. And that's how they're coming when they look. They're going, according to what happens in a public school in the national curriculum, we are looking for signs of that. And we don't see anything else.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there could be a whole amazing essay underneath that, multiple choice dots paper that you'd never ever see.
Yeah.
Oh,
I just thought of another example actually. So I don't know if you've come across this thing called Turing tumble. So it's basically marble powered computers.
Okay.
It's kind of amazing. So it's got this graphic storyline to it, graphic novel storyline to it, and then it's an engineer who's gone out to space and she's on this planet and they can't have silicon chips because they would melt. So they've got all these big mechanical machines that are doing the computations, and she has to fix the machines. And so you've got this physical board with these little hinges and stuff that you have to organize to get the marbles to come down in certain patterns. And I borrowed it off a friend, and I did a few bits. And there's one part where it will count in binary. So the bits of flipping on and off to count the numbers. And we took it to his other friend's house, and we basically taught this kid about binary, which was great. And then the next day, and we saw him he was not getting it at all. And then when the marbles started falling, we just saw this beautiful moment where it all just made sense to him in his head, and he could see it happening. It was just amazing to watch. And then the next day, Rory and I were making macaroni cheese, and we've got the old kind of weight scales. So we had a 1 ounce, 2 ounce, 4 ounce, 8 ounce, and a pound. And Rory was looking at the weights, and he just went, "That's binary." And he made the association between all the columns and stuff. And I was just like, wow, that, just totally from his own exploration and making his own connections and stuff. And it was just that's so cool. And it just feels so much more powerful than if he'd learnt that from a textbook. It was meaningful to him. It was in his environment and it made sense to him. It was,
And that's the kind of learning that does stick.
Yeah, right.
Because it's integrated. So, I mean, this is the other thing that a lot of people are not understanding, is that teaching is not an installation of a software package that's then downloaded and it's there, You can teach people these things on a schedule, but they're not going to retain it. They're not going to integrate it the way that they will if they discover it on their own. So there's not really a loss if they skip a lot of it. I mean, for goodness sakes, if you do really, really well on a test, you get 80%, means there's 20% you didn't get. There's always going to be gaps. It's just a question of whether those gaps are prioritized by the system or whether those gaps are personally relevant. But the things that we do learn properly, we build on. And we keep.
Well, yeah, because I mean, he won't forget that now, and I won't forget that now, because it was just this kind of amazing moment, and whereas a lot of the maths I learned, I've definitely forgotten.
Well, I did not understand most of the maths that I did at school. Even when I figured out how to do it right, I didn't understand it. I didn't know what it was for, and I had no idea how to apply it in real life, and I haven't had to apply the majority of it in real life. And then, of course, when I got to university, I suddenly found that I could do stats and I could do logic, and I was amazed to find out that those were maths and that I had good mathematical ability. It's just that the way that it was being presented at school, just in my brain, they just did not.
Mm.
And that's the problem when people start standardizing things, is it's impossible to, this whole IEP thing. It's not possible. There is only one real individual education plan that works, and that is driven by the child's inner self-direction. You cannot impose a successful IEP. Contradiction in terms. It's not an IEP.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. So what's happening in South Africa then? How is because you've been sort of pushing forward a few agendas.
Yeah.
By the sounds of it.
Yeah. No, we're working on it, and I mean we've got a very receptive minister's office here. They are pretty overwhelmed with bigger issues than us, which is partly what's making it so slow.
Right.
But we're working on it and feeling very encouraged. My hope is that we can create some resources that are useful to you guys over there and other people in other places as well. Some of the stuff in South Africa is obviously going to have to be very specific, because every legislation is very specific, and you have to work with the legislation and the kind of systemic and departmental cultures that you've got. But yeah, look, our main fear has been that the education minister gets replaced before we can finish. And luckily, that hasn't happened so far.
Yeah.
But we shall see. It's difficult because she's not as tied into the corruption circles as would make her tenure more sustainable.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? It's a really difficult juxtaposition there. Like,
yeah. But that's also where we're sort of looking this year at, sort of the difference between Riverstone Village being an NPO and Riverstone Village being an actual setting, and trying to look at how we can provide for bigger, as an NPO than just sort of one little local setting, if we can support the whole Rights-Centric education network here somehow more effectively. So yeah, it's really a year of sabbatical in many, many ways. Yeah. But I mean, I'm not a home education fan. It's like my feeling is, it's like I want every child to have access to being in their own private space at home as much as they need, and in collective community spaces, and in small collaboration space. It's like I really love. I don't think there's a perfect word for it yet, but I mean, I'm liking the word high flex. Hybrid flexible. In terms of, people usually think of that as sort of a blend of online and in person, but it's so much more. If I look at how our kids learn, this is one of the things that we're struggling to articulate to our government here in South Africa, is it doesn't make any sense for our kids to be registered as home educated or in a micro school or in an online school, going to a small independent alternative school. These definitions don't make sense, because the kids who are really thriving flow, as you've experienced as well. It's like your kid will go through maybe a term of wanting to be at greenhouse, and then next year maybe 3/4 of the year will be spent. You know what I'm saying? It's like they navigate their own educational flow when they start becoming empowered, and they pull their resources from everywhere and anywhere. And maybe on this particular interest, it has to be in person, and this one has to be online, and this one is something they're doing completely autodidactically, and that one they need a tutor, and that one they actually kind of need to be in a classroom, which is where I also love Richard Fransham's unschooling school idea that kids should be able to walk into the public school and out again as they need. That's thriving, but that only happens when kids are empowered. And I think that's just so impossible for people in the system to envision. And it probably sounds like a nightmare of chaos to them.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. It's like it's such a leap from what is currently in place that it's kind of their imagination can't go there, or like it goes there, but it, like you say, it kind of creates chaos with it. But I kind of I was trying to envisage like a halfway house, which is probably not necessarily helpful because you're like, well, does that clash the two philosophies really? But I was thinking, in order, because we have got this crisis in education at the moment in the UK where children aren't able to engage with the curriculum as it currently stands and with the school environment as it currently stands. And I was like, but there's still a lot of fear around literacy, numeracy skills, and children getting the right education. I was like, how can you balance that in a way that would actually enable the system to change and be accepted? And one thought I had was if you almost had, so you'd have like half a day of school in inverted commas of which would be focusing on literacy and numeracy, but you would split classes in half. So half of the class would do that in the morning and half of it in the afternoon, which would automatically reduce class sizes to 15, which would enable then for the math and literacy to be taught in a much more bespoke and tailored way, and and more hands-on learning, and more gentle opportunities, I suppose, rather than just ramming the curriculum down their throats. And then have and then as the classes swap, the other half of their day would be around extracurricular activities of their choosing. So it could be archery, or it could be more maths club, or it could be Minecraft, or it could be swimming or tennis or whatever, and so that, and they get to choose that. And obviously, there would probably be limitations that they'd have to choose it for half a term at a time, but at least they are getting a choice and they're getting to do something that is a more vocational style of learning. And just, trying to provide some flexibility within the structure and some freedom within the structure that would still feel comfortable enough for people to engage in, for like the mainstream system to engage in, but it's still a shift. And
I suspect that we probably need a whole kind of plethora of different partial alternatives. If you look at Derry Hannum's 20% suggestion that kids get Fridays to pursue their own interests, or 20% of each day to pursue their own interests, for example. And then, Richard Fransham's got the other proposal with the whole chip thing of having public schools with mixed age classrooms. And, there are, I think we probably, what we really need is we need the system itself to start feeling safe to experiment, or even if it's not feeling safe initially, feeling that it is inevitable and imperative that they experiment. Because I think that, none of these systems is going to work. None of these systems is going to work for every child.
No.
But having a wide variety of options and allowing children to vote with their feet and go to the options that they find copable with, then that's really the only way we'll find over time sort of what quantities of provision of each sort of thing we need. How many formal classes do we need? We'll find out when children are free to attend or not attend. But I think that that's the big shift that has to happen. is for them to trust that kids want to learn. And of course, when you start now forcing kids to be in a place, then they don't. Any human being who's forced up front then does not like, being forced more. So, they're kind of creating this artificial self-fulfilling prophecy that they have to force the kids. No 2-year-old has to learn anything.
Yeah, and I mean, I do feel like, that's why we've seen a massive increase in demand avoidance as a profile, not necessarily PDA, but like, children in mainstream are becoming demand avoidant. And I feel that is because, and then because they're avoiding demands, the control increases. Because like we're trying to get them to comply as a system, and that just increases the resistance, and so we're in this negative cycle of creating more of the issue rather than resolving it. Because I think there is, obviously there are kids who identify like with as PDA, and it feels a very intrinsic part of themselves, but I also notice that there are kids who over time become more and more demand avoidant, and it does feel like it's in response to the system demanding more and more.
So I think it helps to remember that every single human being is demand avoidant. It's like when we are put under enough pressure, and the kind of pressure that gets to us personally, we become increasingly demand avoidant in various ways. And it's really a function of the universal, sort of fight, flight, freeze, collapse system. It's just that, for full on what we really call PDA, we're talking about a brain that goes there under certain circumstances, circumstances that wouldn't drive the vast majority of people there, can take that person there. And that's the definition of PDA. But the demand avoidance itself is there for all of us. It's just a question of circumstances. And I think you're right. The more extreme the demand, remembering that fawning is a fight, flight, freeze response. So this is also where just the sheer psychological illiteracy of the average bureaucrat and policymaker, they do not understand that when you drive people into fawning, which is inappropriate obedience due to stress, that is not healthy. It's not healthy, not sustainable. It's not a good outcome, and they're looking at it as if it is a good outcome. It's really not.
No. Well, like you say, it makes them vulnerable to abuse.
It makes them vulnerable to abuse. It leads to all sorts of mental health and physical stress-related illnesses. And a lot of the time, it creates, pressure build-up that's going to explode somewhere. It creates rebellion. It creates lying and cheating. It creates all of these sort of workarounds, and it's honestly, it's why people are also, on the one hand, going so far into fawn that they'll then sort of vote for a fascist dictator or anybody coming along with an alternative truth set that makes them feel reassured. Because once you install the remote control, it's a question of who gets to push the buttons. So you don't want to get people fawning, because then and then on the other hand, this is also where people have just gotten fed up, and they're just not buying it anymore, because the moral legitimacy of authority has been completely busted.
Yeah.
The emperor has no clothes, and you can't persuade people afterwards that that actually that's not so. So yeah, it's all of it. Yeah.
Sorry. I
was just saying all of it can work in very small contained systems, but we don't have that anymore. Our systems are big and permeable, and you cannot run control on big permeable systems. It doesn't work.
I think they're trying.
Well, they don't know what else to do.
No, but who were the people you mentioned who kind of outlined alternative approaches? I didn't catch their names, and I'd just like to look into them a bit more.
Okay, so do you know Derry Hannum? Because he's in the UK.
No, I don't.
He's the one proposing the 20%.
Okay.
I think you've just missed his. He had a webinar with Aero on it, but maybe they've got a recording.
Okay.
No, Derry's a sweetheart. He's actually, he's retired now, but he was an inspector in Ofsted and stuff. He's written a very nice book called Another Way is Possible. He actually, as a young teacher, turned his classroom in a public school democratic with very good results. Yeah, back in the days where you could just get away with these things.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So how do you spell his name, sorry?
Do you know the progressiveeducation.org site that Joe Symes runs? Because you can find all sorts of people, including Derry, and far more there as well. So yeah, to answer you straight, DERRY and then HANNAM, Derry Hannum. But go along to progressiveeducation.org, because if you go to the various pages there with the resources and the profiles and things like that.
Okay.
And then connect with your local, Sudbury schools and so on.